Today, we're diving into something called New Historicism. It's a way of thinking that basically asks us to flip the script on everything we thought we knew about history. So let me just start by asking you this. When you think about history, what comes to mind? Is it, a timeline of dates, famous names, big events? Basically a set of facts that are set in stone. For the longest time, that was pretty much the standard view. But what if it's way more complicated than that? And this right here is the fundamental shift. See, a traditional historian asks, what happened? Pretty straightforward. But a new historicist, they ask a totally different question. How was this event interpreted? And that one little change moves us from just hunting for facts to exploring what those facts actually meant to people. Which brings us to our first huge idea. New historicism suggests that history isn't just a pile of facts we dig up from the past. It's actually a story. Or, to be more accurate, it's a whole collection of stories that we have to read and analyze, just like you would a novel. So, how does that actually work? Well, first off, new historicists argue that being purely objective is pretty much impossible. And why is that? Because historians are people, right? They can't help but be shaped by their own time, their own culture, their own biases. Plus, it's not like we can just time travel. We experience the past almost entirely through texts, things like letters, official documents, news articles. So history itself becomes a narrative, a story told through all that stuff. And this whole approach completely throws out that nice, clean timeline of history where event A causes B, which then leads to C. Instead, it sees the past as messy, super complex, and constantly shifting, with all these different forces bumping into each other. It's really less of a straight road and way more of a tangled web. Okay, so if history is a story, that leads to a really important question. Who gets to write it? And that, my friends, brings us to the whole idea of power. Now, to really get how New Historicism thinks about power, we've got to understand this one key term, discourse. Just think of a discourse as a specific way of talking and thinking about the world that a culture develops. It's kind of like a special pair of glasses that shapes how you see and understand absolutely everything. For instance, the discourse of science has its own language, its own values, its own way of figuring out what's true. And the same goes for the discourse of Christian fundamentalism or the discourse of liberal humanism. Each one is its own social language, giving people a framework to make sense of the world. And you know what? They're all out there, competing with each other. Now, the old school way of thinking about power was super simple. You got your kings, your presidents, your big institutions up at the top, and power just flows straight down from them to everybody else. But New Historicism comes along and says, no, that's not really how it works. They see power as way more dynamic. It isn't just held by a few people at the top, it circulates. It's moving in all directions, all the time, through every conversation, every book, every idea. And those discourses we just talked about, they're the things that carry that power around society. What this means is you can't just neatly label a historical period with one big idea, like the Age of Reason. The reality is so much more interesting. It's actually this noisy, chaotic, and fascinating mashup of all these competing discourses, all wrestling for influence at the same time. So, where does something like literature fit into all this? Well, when you're looking through this lens, a novel is never just a novel. It's an active player in the whole historical game. New Historicism argues that a text, like a book, and its historical context are mutually constitutive. It's a fancy term, but it just means they create each other. So sure, a novel is shaped by the history of its time, of course, but it also helps shape the ideas and the discourses of that time. It's a total two-way street. So how do we actually analyze this relationship? Well, new historicists borrow a really cool tool from anthropology called thick description. It basically means you look at some cultural thing, a novel, a painting, even a law, and you dig really, really deep to understand all the hidden meanings and cultural codes it had for the people who were actually there at the time. All right, I know that's a lot of theory, so let's try to make this way more concrete. We're going to put on our new historicist glasses and look at a really famous American novel. Yep, we're going to take a quick look at The Great Gatsby, but instead of just talking about its plot and characters, we're going to ask a different question. What cultural conversations, what discourses was this novel a part of? So on the one hand, the novel is totally tangled up in this huge American discourse of the self-made man. You know the story? Success is guaranteed if you just have enough grit and good character. Gatsby's entire life is basically him trying to make that story real. But then, at the very same time, the book is shot through with this opposing idea. It's this powerful urge to escape the past, to break free from the very real limits of your social class and your personal history, which, of course, is something Gatsby tragically fails to do. So what's the takeaway here? The Great Gatsby isn't just a mirror reflecting the 1920s. It's an active participant in a huge cultural debate, both promoting and seriously questioning one of America's most powerful myths. It was a product of its history, sure, but it was also a producer of it. Okay, so let's boil all this down. What are the big things to remember? First, history isn't just a list of facts. It's an interpretation, a story. Second, power isn't just top-down. It circulates everywhere through these competing stories we call discourses. And finally, literature and history are locked in this constant dance, creating and shaping each other as they go.
And all of that leaves us with one last question to chew on. If history is really made up of all these competing stories, and if we're living through history right now, then what are the most powerful stories, the dominant discourses that are shaping our world today? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.